Welcome children to Europe. Now in this map you can see the 7 continents. Let us locate Europe. The red color is a Europe and let us see the surrounding continents around Europe. And towards the east we are having Asia, and towards the west we are having North America, and in the south we are having Africa. So these are the continents which are surrounding Europe. And when it is coming to oceans, in the north we are having Arctic Ocean, and in the west we are having Atlantic Oceans. So this is exactly Europe. So Europe is near to the North Pole and it is located in the northern hemisphere. Now in Europe, in this lesson we will learn the location, the physical features and the climates. This is Europe and we are having nearly 44 countries in Europe. And if you see, Russia is the biggest country and it is separated from Asia and Europe. Half part of Russia is located in Asia and another half we find it in Europe. Now come to the boundaries. As I told you, Europe, uh, if we go towards the east, we are finding the Asia continent, and Ural Mountains and Caspian Sea, they separate Asia and Europe. And if we come towards the west, you find Atlantic Ocean. And in the north, we are having Arctic Ocean, and in the south, we are having Mediterranean Sea, which separate Europe and Africa. And one more thing, children, Asia and Europe, they belong to one landmass. They are continuous in one land. So we call them as Eurasia. So these are the different countries in Europe. You can find here Portugal, Spain, France, Germany, Italy, Sweden, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Poland, Switzerland, Denmark, and here United Kingdoms. So these are the some of the important countries which we find in Europe. This map is talking about the physical features. So in Europe we are having many rivers and mountains, and these rivers are very useful to them. Now let us see the rivers. Now if you see the Volga, it is the longest river in Europe and it go and join into Caspian Sea. And when we come near the Black Sea, we are having Don and Danube. Yes, and the same way you can find Oder, Rhine, Po. So these are the some of the important rivers. So in Europe, the rivers are used not only for agriculture. Water of the is used not only for agriculture but also for transport. They act as a means of transportation, and fishing is also an important occupation here. Now let us see the mountains which are present in Europe. Yes, we are having the Alps, and this Alps is covered with ice. So we find two rivers here, and in Italy we are having the Pyrenees and Apennines we are having here, and the Pyrenees which separate the Spain and France. And here we are having Ural Mountain. Yes, so we can find many mountains here. We are also having in Sweden here Sandivarian mountains, and we are having another mountains which are separating Caspian Sea and Black Sea, and they are called as Casacas mountains. So in Europe, we are finding many important mountains. Now let us see the seas which are located in Europe. As I told you, in the south we are having Mediterranean Sea. In the same way we have Black Sea, Caspian Sea. And when you are coming to Sweden and Finland, here you find the Baltic Sea. Again here we are finding the North Sea. So we are finding these are the 5 important seas. Now let us see different land masses which we find in Europe. One is peninsula. Peninsula is a piece of land surrounded by water on 3 sides. Now in Europe you can find Italy. You find Italy, it is in Mediterranean Sea, and another one is uh, it is surrounded by 3 sides on water, and the other part is attached to a land. The same way, even India is also called as a peninsula. Now, next we find as island. It is a landmass which is surrounded by water on all the sides. In Europe, you can locate an island, UK, and if you come to India, Sri Lanka is an island. And we also have bays and gulfs. Now, what are these bays and gulfs? Here in the bays, the water is in the middle and it is enclosed on the 3 sides by land, and the water which is in the middle, it is joining with on the other side with water. Okay, okay. So in a bay, the land curves inward on the mouth of the bay is usually wide, whereas the gulf is a narrow inlet of the sea and has a narrow mouth. Now, if this opening on the other side, this water, and the opening is very narrow, then we call it as a gulf, and if the opening is very broad we call it as a bay. Now here you can see, children, here this water is joining with another water on the other side, and the opening where the place where it is open joining, we call it as a mouth. There it is very wide, so we call it as a bay. And here the opening is very narrow, so we call it as a gulf. So in Europe we find many bays and gulfs, and these bays and gulls are very useful. And here even we can find fishes, they come and breed here, and these bays and gulls are useful for harbor. The bays and gulls are the part of the sea enclosed by land on 3 sides. Okay, a bay and gulls are protected from the storms of the high seas, and they are very useful for building harbors where the ship can safely anchor and we can upload or unload the cargo. And also the deep gulfs and bays are preferred for building harbors. So harbor is a place where the ship can come and it can stop. Now let us see the climate. So there are some factors which affect the climate. One is distance from the equator. Next, the Atlantic Ocean, which is in the west, it is having an influence on Europe. Then the warm current and the Mediterranean climate. Now, distance from the equator. Now, if we observe the map, children, equator is in the middle, and Europe is near to the North Pole. So Europe is generally far away from the equator. So as we move northward, away from the equator, we find Europe. And in Europe, it is very cold. And you will find snow. And summers are not very warm as it is very near to the polar region. We all know that Arctic Ocean is almost frozen. Next factor which influence the climate of Europe is the Atlantic Ocean. As the Atlantic Ocean is on the west side, we find the wind blowing from the west. So the wind which is blowing from the west towards the Europe, we call that wind as westerlies. And this wind is very warm because warm current is flowing here. As warm current is flowing, the wind is warm, and when it is flowing, it is keeping the Western Europe warmer than the Eastern Europe. So if you compare, Eastern Europe is very warm. It is very cold in winter. Almost everything is frozen, but Western Europe is not as cold as the Eastern Europe. Now, There is a warm current. You know, at equator, it is very, very hot. So you read it in your previous classes that at equator we have warm current. So this warm current will be traveling from equator towards the poles. So when it is warm current, it is starting at the equator, and it is, as it moves towards the North Africa. There we call it as Gulf Stream. From there again it travels to the western part of the Europe, and we call it here Northern Atlantic Drift. So because of this warm current, we can tell that the wind is blowing and it is keeping the western Europe very, very warm, and it is giving rain to the western Europe. So it is having a very, very impact on the climate of western Europe. Now, another climate which we find in Europe is the climate which is near to the Mediterranean Sea. I told in the south we have Mediterranean Sea, which is separating Europe and Africa. So the countries which are located near to the Mediterranean Sea, they have a Mediterranean type of climate. Okay, and here in the rainy, it winters. uh, in the winter season it rain and the summers are dry, and this climate, it is called as a Mediterranean type of climate. And here we can find juicy fruits like figs, grapes, oranges, etc. So children, here we read about the location of the Europe and what are its boundaries, the mountains, the plains, the plateaus, and the peninsulas, and the different types of climates. Thank you, children.